I'm Mick Moloney from Moloney Architects. There's a lesson in that. Don't put your notes on a cloud document and then come to lecture here with no Wi-Fi. So, happy to get started? Yeah, a few minutes only, that's right. Excuse me. So this is our project, Alterations extension project in Ballarat on Wadawurrung country. Our clients are the delightful Gary and Tara Gullock, who were in a property just outside of Ballarat on 10 acres, and they got sick and tired of doing the garden maintenance out there, and so they bought a property right in the middle of town. And they came in with a question that we get a lot in Ballarat, which is how do we create something new, something that'll suit a modern lifestyle without destroying the old heritage building that they bought, that they loved. And Ballarat's a fairly conservative place. There's a lot of beautiful old architecture, a lot of old people buying that architecture, and one of our challenges is to develop trust with our clients and to convince them in some ways of the merits of creating a contemporary space, or creating an alteration or addition to that space that'll actually improve it rather than diminish it. So this is their beautiful property in Lyons Street, which is basically right in the middle of town. So that's just the central area of Ballarat. We've got our site right there, sort of between the CBD and the lake. It's an extremely narrow site for these buildings. So it's got this really huge, big 1920s era building at the front with really strong verticality, but on a very long, narrow block. And interestingly, it's got a shared driveway. So that's about 2.4 metres wide, going down through the middle between the sort of stablemate house on the other side. And that's an easement that extends right down the block. This were the existing conditions that we were met with. And there were a series of really unsuccessful 1980s, 90s alterations and a small addition at the back that were, once we sort of peeled those away, we were left with this is our sort of true existing conditions. At the rear of the property, sort of importantly, we identify that there's these really three quite beautiful intact windows and an existing access point which works with the floor plan of the existing building. That's our very narrow driveway, shared driveway to next door. And our conceptual sort of, we looked at quite a few different options for the clients in terms of how do we get vehicles in off the street. There's no parking, unfortunately, for residents. It's all assumed that you'll get on-site parking. And with some grown-up kids and grandkids and sort of a big family life, they really needed to have space for 3 or 4 vehicles towards their preference. So yes, we experimented with a couple of different options, but we ultimately settled on this version here, which allows for a driveway to sneak in down the side. Importantly, we've created, I think in contrast to the previous project, our approach really has been to try to restore this original building as much as possible, and then create a nice sort of shadow line connection between the extension at the back and the original building. So all that's been re-rendered and restored to its as much as we could to its original condition, and the new work is about sort of creating these view lines and connections between the shadow line space, or the courtyard space between the old and new, and as well as views from the new extension all the way through. New extension's also got so a lovely little, basically a clerestory window that runs around all 4 sides, and that's provided these little glimpses up into the existing house, as well as the heritage context, which is these little moments of chimneys and roof details. So existing proposed plan. So you can see just in this section in here, we've got these 2 courtyards with creating a little bit of separation. And then as part of the landscape response, we've sort of taken the landscape paving and run it through the house, but we'll see that in the video in a moment. It's our section. So it was part of a res code response, but also trying to create a bit of its own identity for this project was to sort of contrast that strong verticality of the original building with something with a strong sense of horizontality. And these projects by the wonderful Ben Hosking, with just sort of trying to capture this light that comes through around the clerestory windows. It's particularly important in Ballarat, where we have about 10 months a year of winter. So it's a sort of a very nice glass box for clients. They absolutely love it. And even though that does face sort of northwest, there's a really large deciduous tree which provides them with all of the sun protection that they require in summer. And then in winter, it really just drinks in that sunlight, which is great. Interior, we wanted this building to really feel like a quite crafted extension of the exterior form for the interior response. So we've carried through a lot of our steel, structural steel into architectural steel. We've got some lovely sort of continuous band of steel running around which houses various uses. And obviously the plywood as well, which creates this sort of sense that it's a one sort of single piece of joinery. All of this was documented by our in-house passive house certified architect, Owen Doherty, who spent a hell of a lot of time working out how to create a building that looks like it's got a steel frame internally and externally, but having no thermal bridging. And so that was quite the feat. Thanks. I'm just going to play the video. I think we're pretty close to the end. And I was hoping I could just let that run while you're doing some questions. And that's just the connection between the old and new and the landscape courtyard running through. And only really the minor interventions we were required to do to the original structure, which was to put an ensuite and robe in to reconfigure the ground floor.